Today we built another 3D printer enclosure. Hello everyone, Chris here, and we are going to build a 3D printer enclosure today. And we're going to use the design that Prusa came up with for their printers, but we're going to modify it slightly and make it fit an Ender 3. Now a couple of years ago we did build a Lack table enclosure for a Prusa style printer. And this was the outcome of that build. In that video, I did it for the Prusa Mark II, but it also fits the Mark III. One of the biggest questions I get on that video is, will this enclosure fit my Ender 3? Well, the Ender 3 is quite a bit taller than a Prusa machine, just by the way it's designed. But Prusa has released a version 2 of their enclosure that allows you to take a Prusa printer with their multi-material unit set on top, and it still all fits inside. So that makes the design quite a bit taller. Enter the Prusa Enclosure version 2. They've made it taller, as well as allowed for an opening in the lid, so that the MMU2 setting on top of the printer fits nicely. They've also added this hinge and prop, so that it's easier to work on the machine, as well as 5 spool holders that set on top of the Lack enclosure. So with that design change and a few tweaks here and there, that should give us more than enough room to fit our Ender 3 inside. Now there are some features like the 5 spool holders that I'm not interested in because I'm not doing multi-material. And the power supply does fit on the outside of the enclosure because you don't want your PSU being subjected to heat like inside an enclosure. So those things are going to have to be changed up, as well as a few other things. But that's what we're going to do today. We're going to go through all the steps to build one of these version 2 enclosures tailored for an Ender 3. So let's get started just by looking at all the parts that we need and the parts that I'm going to have to create to get this done. So first let's talk about all the printed parts you're going to need. Now these aren't all the parts. There's going to be a few things that are going to change during this build because I haven't designed the part yet because I'm not exactly sure how it's going to go for the Ender 3. So things might change just a bit. There will be a few additional prints that need to be made, but you will see more of that as we go through the video. For instance, this part right here, this is a custom part to be able to hold the Ender 3 PSU underneath the Lack table. But I am going to reprint it, if it fits correctly, in the same plastic that I have all these other parts. By the end of this, all the parts used on the enclosure will have been printed in Jessie PLA from Printed Solid. This is Moon Blue. Also, one of the other parts is the replacement for the PSU. Now you use this on a Prusa printer to help give you some rigidity because the PSU is kind of a structural part. Now on an Ender 3, the PSU is just kind of hanging there. But I thought I'd go ahead and engineer one so that it gives you just a little bit more stability on the printer when you take the PSU off. It can't hurt anything, so I'll just go ahead and create one. This is my rough draft. I will have one in blue before this is all over. So let's hit the highlights. You've got 4 bottom corners and 2 hinges on the bottom. You have all the pieces that go around the top to make the surround. All of these screw together, and a couple of hinges. You have your prop rod that gets glued together. Then you have the 2 hinges for the lid, the lineup portion that helps in the front, and then the hinge for the prop rod. And then you have all the skirt pieces. Now on the skirt, this section fits on the doors. It goes on the top of the acrylic. These sections fill in on the sides and the back. And these sections over here, you actually don't need these. These are to cover the hole if you cut a hole in the top table to allow for the MMU2. I printed them out just in case we need a little bit more headroom, but I don't intend to use these. But if you're doing the actual V2 using an MMU2, you'll need even more parts than this. Now most of these parts need support. But if you use the Prusa files in the 3MF format, they have already put the enforcers in there for Prusa Slicer for you. And just an example, you can see all these boxes around here. These are the support enforcers. So even if you don't use Prusa Slicer most of the time, you might want to go ahead and pull them in just to see where you need to put all the supports. Most of these parts will need it. And to print all of these parts is somewhere around 200 hours, so be aware of that. You'll see this a little bit later, but I'm also going to print some of these to hold my LED strip because I'm going to put lights in my enclosure, and I'm going to print some zip tie style wire strips I can use my double-sided tape on to help with the wire management. Notice I didn't print any of the spool holder items because I don't intend to use them. Then we have all the hardware parts we need. Now I am in the US, so I am going to use Freedom units on some of these screws because that's all I could get a hold of. Prusa calls for 5mm by 20mm panhead screws around 35. I am substituting number 10s. These are 3/4 of an inch long. They call for 4 6mm by 50mm screws. I am subbing in number 14s by 2 inch. They call for 4 6 by 30mm screws. I am subbing in number 14s by 1 1/4 inch. You only need 4, I just bought a handful. And then we need 12 M3 by 30mm screws. This is to assemble some of the plastic parts around the top. 4 M3 by 18s. I believe these are used on some of the hinges, maybe for the top lid. And then 4 M3 by 10s. This is for the hinge on the prop rod. And then we need some magnets. These go in the hinges, which is a really clever design. I'll show you this. But these are 20 by 6 by 2mm. I'll leave a link in the description to all this stuff. I've also got some 24-volt LED strip because I'm going to use the power supply on the Ender 3 to power the lights. And some extra wire. I believe this is 20 gauge just to get those lights hooked up. And then everything else. We got 3 Lack tables. I am going to put 3 on my build, 1 on the bottom to make it a little bit taller. If you do the MMU2 build, you probably don't want that third one because it's not as easy to work on it. This design is made so that you can lift the top and then work on that MMU2. I'm going to leave that portion on my build because I do think it's handy at some point, but I don't need that extra clearance, so I'm going to go for the third table. There probably will be some 3D printed parts to help hook that table on as well, but that'll come later. Then you need all the acrylic sheets for the version 2 build. You can get these pre-cut with all the holes from Printed Solid, maybe a little bit of super glue, and I'm going to use some double-sided foam tape to hold up my lights and do a few other things. So there's a rough list of all the parts we're going to use. Again, things are going to change a little bit during the video because I don't know exactly some of the dimensions of the parts yet. I'm going to have to create a few things on the fly, but I will leave a full list of everything I used in the description below. So let's get to building. So we're going to start with this Lack table right here. Now for your build, it might be a good idea to go ahead and put the legs on this table first before we start with the printed parts. But I can't really show that camera angle too well, so I'm going to start with the printed parts, but just be aware of that. So we need to prep our hinges and 2 of our bottom corners. We're going to take these and slide some of those magnets in. They go in the hinge right here, and the corners right in here. And this is what helps keep the door closed. So make sure you have them orientated correctly so they attract each other. So in this corner, we'll put one in right there. We'll make sure this side is the one that attracts, and we'll put the other one in right here. And that way the door can swing out, and then when it comes back in, the magnet should hold it pretty tight. You have one of these on the top and the bottom. And same for the other corner. Like so. Then we'll use some of our M3 by 30mm screws from the bottom to hold those hinges in place. There's one. There's 2. Next, we're going to go back to the table here and attach these corners, but you might have noticed that I had these extra printed parts here that I stopped on the first few layers. That's because when I printed these, I didn't get the lineup portions on them. That's these right here, these really tiny pieces. These are the parts that you actually line up with the corner of the table so that this hole is in the same location as the leg screw hole on the other side. So I just printed the first couple of layers so I could line that hole up and I could still use these parts. I'll show you more here in a second. So we're just going to call this the front. The only difference is you have hinges in the front. But to help you locate where these go, they have these little extra pieces around the part. So that part lines up with the outside of the table. So I'm just going to use this part to mark my hole. And then use that mark to line up my corner. So be aware of that when you're printing these. You want to keep those little lineup marks on there. And on these, this is where Prusa would have you use the M6 by 30 millimeter screws. I am using the number 14 by 1¼ inches. And they just go down through the center. And don't get too carried away tightening these up. There's not a whole lot of wood in one of these tables. And we'll just come and do that for the other corner. There's our front two, and then we'll put our back two on. They don't have any hinges. So your Ender 3 is going to set in here like this. This will be the front of the printer. Your power supply would be over here. Your main board would be over here. So I'm going to let the wires run out this side so I have a little extra slack. So the one with the hole, I'm going to put over here in this corner. Again, you can change it up. It's kind of up to you. If you do decide to put it on this side, it will run out the back. So note when you're putting the back corners on, one of these has this hole in it. This is where your PSU power wires run out so that you can either plug it in or you can run over to your PSU that's underneath your enclosure. The Prusa printers and the Ender 3 both have the PSU on the same side. I'm going to put this on the back left side of the enclosure so the power wire can run out the side. You could flip it over to the other side if you wanted to, but you'd be going out the back of the enclosure instead of the side of the enclosure. But this will also, putting it over on that side, give us a little bit of extra slack on our power wires. So the one with that hole, I'm going to set it just like this. Then our last one over here will go on the back right. And our corners are on. Then we're going to take the legs of actually the second table and put them inside these corners. And we're going to use the number 10 by 3/4 inch screws on the sides, one on this side, one on the back here, to hold them on. There's the first one. We'll do the same for all the rest. So now we've got our base top installed with the 4 corners and the legs. This is where the printer will set. And now we're going to move to the top of the enclosure. It's just another top of a lack table. But on that, we'll have a rod holder that holds the lid up, a guide, and some hinges. We're also going to install some lights. Now, it doesn't really matter on this one either, but we're going to call this the front and this the back. So in the front, we'll have our push rod hinge over here. We'll have 2 hinges for the top and the back. And then on this side, we'll have the piece that helps align our top down into the printed part around the surround, around the acrylic. And all of these will mount with the M5 by 20 millimeter screws or the number 10 by 3/4 that we're going to use. We've got our alignment piece screwed down. We'll go ahead and move to our prop rod hinge. And then we'll spin around. Then we'll shoot some screws in these 2 holes for our back hinges. And for the prop rod, it's going to go like this, but you have an opening right here to allow for this pan head screw. So it installs like that. Now the teeth on the lower section, the teeth face the top of the enclosure, like this. So we're just going to super glue these 2 together. You can use gloop if you want to. Like so. And then this will slide on. And you thread in an M3 by 10 millimeter screw, 1 on each side. And don't get too carried away of tightening these. You do want them to be flush, but you want it to operate smoothly. And then we've got 1 screw in each one of these back hinges. You don't necessarily have to put all 4 in this. It's pretty stable right now, but I am going to go ahead and sink 2 more. Now, since we're not going to do the cutout for the MMU2, we're going to go ahead and put some lights in here. And if you're going to put lights on, I recommend you put all your corners on just to mock it up to make sure you know where your boundaries are. You don't want your lights interfering with your plastic parts. So we'll just set the corners on for a moment. And now we have a rough idea of where we need to avoid. I would keep them on the inside a bit. And if you're going to use these 3D printed clips that I created for your LED strip, this is a bridge that you can slide the light strip underneath. All you need to do is run a razor or something underneath here to free it. And then it opens up and you can just use it as a clip. So I just cut 4 sections of my light strip. Again, remember Ender 3 is 24 volt. I'm going to use that PSU. So get 24 volt lights. And I've got 3 little pieces of wire here. I'm going to connect them all together. And then I've got a longer length that will run down the back of the table to the PSU. So now I just need to solder them up. And I actually like to use my Wham Bam splat mat for soldering. It works pretty well. It does kind of blow out the camera if you haven't noticed. It is very orange. And after I put solder on all the contacts on all the strips, that makes it a little easier to put the wire on after the fact. So on this one, I'm going to put the longer lead because this one's going to go to the back left because that's where the PSU is going to be underneath the table now. Make sure you have positive and negative correct when you line all these up. Then we'll hook it to our next section. Now we've got all 4 connected together. Now we can put them on the top of our table. And then I'm just going to organize the lights with these clips on them. The reason why I'm using the clips is because I don't have a lot of luck with the adhesive on the back of these light strips holding for a long period of time. And if you use the clips, I'm just going to use some double-sided tape to stick those down. You're just wasting these clips. You could actually remove these lights if you wanted to use them for another project or something like that down the road. I just have better luck taping these clips down than I do the lights. So we'll get all the clips situated. And now we've got some double-sided foam tape on all the backs of our clips. And all we have to do is work around and tape it down. And it's a little off-center, but it's going to serve our purpose. It's always handy to have light in your enclosure. Now we're going to screw together the surround that the lid closes down on top of. This is the back section. It just slides into these 2 pieces back here. It's a pretty tight fit. You might want to give it a tap. And it connects to the other corner piece. Slides together just like that. And then this back piece is actually put together with 2 M3 by 10 millimeter screws, 1 on each side. Now that we have the back piece assembled, it probably makes more sense to go ahead and install the hinges on the front corners. We'll go ahead and put the magnets in and make sure they're correct. And I don't think I mentioned it earlier, but there are 4 hinges, and they're pretty much all the same, but make sure you're using the magnet in the top so it doesn't fall out. You can switch them left and right to make sure the magnet is always on top, whether it be the bottom or the top hinge. But we'll just install our magnet in this slot right here. Remember, make sure it's going to catch on the magnet that's in the hinge. Try to pair them up. These 2 stick to one another. So we'll put one side in the magnet facing out. And then the other side in this slot facing out towards the hinge. And the hinge just slides in like this. Actually, the magnet helps hold it in place while you put the screw in it. These take M3 by 30 millimeter screws. There's one. And same thing with the other one. Magnet goes down in the corner right here. Hinge goes on. M3 by 30. So we're good there. Now we're going to go ahead and put the whole thing together with the center sections, but I think it actually makes more sense how this works if I lay it out on the top, just so you know which side goes with the prop rod. So this is the back here where the hinges are. So here's our back piece. It lays down here just like this. And the prop rod sets inside that section. So your front corners, it's pretty self-explanatory. The hinges go towards the center so it can support the door. But your prop rod goes inside this piece, like this. Now you have 2 center pieces that have a slot for the plexiglass. And that kind of tells you how they go on. One has a valley in it, one doesn't. So you need that valley to support that prop rod. So this side gets the one with the valley. This side gets the one that's actually just turned over. So it goes like this. Just to keep you from getting confused, you don't want to get it all together and then not have room for that prop rod to fit. This whole thing assembles in the center section with M3 by 30mm screws from the top. So now that we know what we're doing, we can go ahead and put it together. So our prop rod side, M3 by 30, one on each side. These will go through both parts and hold it together. So it goes together just like this, and then you flip it over, and it goes right here, same way. It comes from the back side with M3 by 30mm screws. And now that's assembled, and when we set it on top of the enclosure, that prop rod will actually run down through here, and it'll kind of fold it up when it's closed. And now we're going to move to this side and do pretty much exactly the same thing. M3 by 30mm screws from the bottom to connect all these three pieces together. And now that we're all set here, the surround is together, now we can move to putting the plexi on the other table. We do need to install the legs on those, so we'll get that done. But in my opinion, this is what stands out on this version, the version 2, versus the original one. This makes the whole thing a lot sturdier, rather than just having the corners. And you'll see that a bit more in a moment. So now we're back to the part of the enclosure that the printer actually sets on. And I didn't put the legs on this before because it was really hard to film it. And now things are going to get a bit tricky with filming this whole assembly. I'm going to have to kind of do it from the side, but bear with me, I'll do my best. But it would be really hard to put the acrylic in and then put the legs on after. So now we're going to go ahead and put the legs on it. And if you've never put the legs on a Lack enclosure before, they just give you this long double-ended screw and you use the leg as a tool to install it. So you just put it in the hole and you start twisting. And you do that for all 4 legs, and they'll get tight as they reach the bottom of the table. So I'm going to go around and do all 4 of these, and then I'm going to build the 3rd table as well, because mine's going to be 3 high. If you're not going to use the MMU2, 3 high should be okay. So this one's done. I'm going to go ahead and build the 3rd table while we're at it. Now for the 3rd table, I made these leg holders right here. On my first enclosure, I just used some metal L brackets, but I figured I'd go ahead and make some printed parts. I just altered some of the parts from the version 1 enclosure, and I'm going to screw these down in the corners so that they can hold the legs on better. I've got one for each, they're all identical, and I'm going to use those number 14 by 1 1/4 inch screws to fasten them down. So the table that the printer's actually setting on, the feet of that will set inside these cups. There's our 4 leg cups for that enclosure table. Now we'll go ahead and put the feet on this one as well. Same method, long double-ended screw. And a whole lot of twisting. You really don't need to see this whole process twice. Just know that I did it. So here we go. We have our base table. Those feet have a couple holes in them. We're going to use the number 10 by 3/4 screws to put that table on top of it and secure it. So that one sits just like this. I'll put some screws in it. Then we'll move to installing the plexiglass. Now moving up, let's talk about these acrylic sheets for a minute. I have removed the plastic. If you get your sheet from Printed Solid, they've already cut the 5 holes where you can use your MMU2 if you are using this for your Prusa printer. But also something to note, let me show you after I get these installed. These just slide down in these tabs. I'm going to spin it around. The front of the enclosure is actually over here. I'm going to spin that to be front. But the back one will slide in back here. And then you'll have 2 side panels with no holes. You can slide on the left and right. Just like that. And you'll notice these panels are actually taller than the legs. And there's a reason for that. These panels are taller than they are wider. Just note that. But let's move to the top again for a moment. Now remember when I showed you all the different printed parts at the beginning, I showed you these 3 sets? These vanes are made to make up the slack for the shorter plexi panels that you use on the version 1, or acrylic panels, whatever you have. So you feed these down in this slot, and then you put your plastic inside here so that it makes up for that gap. These are actually quite challenging to put on sometimes, and if you don't have to, this enclosure works a lot better. Well, Printed Solid has made those panels taller so we don't have to use these. So let's go back to the table. We can now put our top surround on. And when we push it on, the plexi panels, they'll be enough to go inside the printed part and make a nice solid fit. So Printed Solid has done us a solid. So basically all you got to do now is feed this acrylic into the opening on all the printed parts all the way around. And with that acrylic being longer like that, it's a much nicer fit. I know I said that already, but I'm really glad that they did that. Now, same that we did with the legs down here and for the additional table, we're just going to go around number 10 by 3/4 screws and attach this to all of the legs. And to try to get you a little better shot of the top here, we also have a hole on the top of each one of the legs. You can see this one here. That will take one of these number 14 by 2-inch screws, and that will go into the hole that was meant to use to attach the leg to the top. That will secure it even further. You might not even need these number 10 by 3/4 if you use these, but I like to go ahead and put them both on. So we'll put 4 of these in, one on each leg. Now all 4 of the 2-inch screws are in. Now I'll work on the 3/4 screws that go on the sides. Again, it's pretty stable with just those 4. You might not even need those, but I'm going to go ahead and put them on. All the screws are in. Now we can move to fitting the top. The biggest trick for the top, you want to make sure you feed in your prop rod, and then you can align your hinges. Also remember, we have a wire for our lights. I'm keeping that on the side with the PSU. I'm going to run it inside the enclosure, and then we'll run it down to the second table where the PSU is going to be installed. Now we're over on the side of our enclosure. We're going to do this on both sides, but we're going to attach the hinges for the top. From the outside and inside, we're going to use M3 by 18mm screws just to drive it into the hinge. We'll put the 2 outside on, left and right, then we'll open it up and put the 2 inside on. Those don't need to be very snug at all. Just flush with the top of the part is good. Now we'll do the other side. Then I'll spin it back around to face front. And we can open it up. And do the inside too. And there we go. Those 2 are actually kind of tricky to get to. You might have to use your wrench. I've been using my drill for most of this, but it's kind of tight in there, so you might have to fidget around with it just a bit. But now we can open and close the lid, and I know this is meant for the MMU2, but this does make it really handy pulling your printer in and out, or just working on it in general. So I really like this feature. And to close it, you can just pull on that prop rod, and it folds right up. Now we can go ahead and put our door panels on. Remember, this applies the same for the Printed Solid kit as the other panels. If you get their kit, they're tall enough. If not, you have to use those printed parts to fill in the gap. But these are tall enough, they'll just slide right in. And those fit nice and snug. Pretty happy with that magnet design. We'll probably need to adjust it just a little bit, but the enclosure is pretty much done. Now we need to move to making some changes on the printer. We need to be concerned with the PSU and make sure that the bed cable is going to clear on the Ender 3. We probably want to make a part to divert that cable in another direction. I've just got my bone stock Ender 3, and let's take a look at the fit so far. There should be plenty of headroom for your Z, even when the extruder's all the way to the top. With the bed all the way out in front, we get almost to the door, but it does still clear. But then in that position, if we go all the way to the back, the wire just touches the back of the enclosure. So we probably ought to make a part to divert those wires. So we'll work on all that now. So now we need to work on the printer a little bit. I'm going to create a plastic part to divert the wires out the side instead of out the back for the heated bed, so it doesn't hit the back of the enclosure. I'm also going to remove the PSU so we can relocate it underneath the enclosure. And we are going to need a bracket for that because this PSU isn't the same size as the one on the Prusa. Also, I'm going to design a part that replaces the PSU on the printer. You don't have to do this, but it does add just a bit more rigidity to your printer. You don't even have the PSU connected to the bottom of the printer in the stock setup, so this might be a bit of a benefit. Now, with that said, why would you want an enclosure? Most of the time, you want an enclosure to make things more stable, especially when you print high-temp plastic. Now, on the Ender 3, you do have a PTFE lined hot end, and you can't go much over 250 without melting that. But you can print some materials, like ABS and ASA, down around the 240 mark, so you might be able to get away with that setup. But also, it just adds to the cleaner look of the printer altogether. It's easier to see, especially when you have it up and there's some lights in there, and it might even make your printer quieter. I've had some mixed results with the Lack enclosure because of how thin the tables are. It does tend to resonate a bit, but there's a lot of good reasons to have an enclosure for your printer. You can have a lot better success even with ABS on a passive enclosure like this. They will get up to around 32C and maintain it, and that does help a lot with your layer adhesion. So now let's work on some parts for the printer. So we're just going to remove the PSU from the printer. There's just a couple of screws, one up here on top, one down here, and the whole thing comes off. We'll swing it out of the way. We might need to make the wires on this a bit longer for our enclosure, but we'll check that out here in a moment. And then I am interested in coming up with some sort of bracket to replace that PSU, just to make the whole frame a bit stronger. This is my first try. I just printed out with some yellow that I had. But basically we're going to use some nuts on the back side of the part, use those stock screws to hook it to the frame, then some screws and some T-nuts on the bottom to hook it on the bottom frame. Not necessary, but I do think it's a nice add-on. So once I get this where I want it, I will definitely reprint this in blue so everything matches. I'm also going to create some sort of part for here for the strain relief for the bed that diverts the wires more in this direction so it doesn't hit the back of the panel. On this one, I'm probably going to print it out of some PETG, probably just some black, because you don't want that PLA because it's going to get kind of warm here. This is exactly what Prusa does with theirs. I'm just going to rework it for this design. Also, I've got this bracket to help us mount our PSU underneath our table. I think this one's pretty close, but again, I want to print it out of blue. And just so I can show you what we're going to do with the PSU, I've removed it. It's going to sit under here just like this, upside down. This is the left side of the enclosure. I would put it on the back, but I think it's handier to get to the switch on this side. And then our bracket will sit underneath, right there, and then screw down to the leg of the enclosure. It's just going to kind of sandwich it in there, and I'll probably make a part up top to make it even more snug. So let's start with that piece that replaces the PSU. Again, you don't really need one of these. I thought I'd just go ahead and make it, but it just adds a bit more support. I used the stock screws on this side with a couple of M4 nylock nuts, and then down here, I have some M4 by 12 millimeter screws and 2 T-nuts that go into the top of this extrusion. If your frame and gantry are nice and square, this should butt right up against it. You should be able to bolt it down. Just kind of a nice add-on. Now we'll move to the heated bed wires. This is the stock injection molded piece that comes with the Ender 3. It does have a little cap on it, but it goes straight out the back. I found that same part that had been modded out on Thingiverse. I'll leave the link in the description. But I just changed it out a bit more, and I pointed the wire holder to go down. Since the heated bed wires run underneath the printer, it doesn't pinch it too bad going from the bed over to the back of this, and you have some spots for zip ties so you can tie it down. That makes it much shorter, and we should have a lot more clearance now. I'm going to try it out for a little while. As long as the wires don't move, which they shouldn't, it shouldn't be that big a deal. This round portion just slides underneath the bed, and it gets trapped in between the spring and the bottom Y plate right here. So the spring goes on first, then your wire manager, then you can put your bed knobs back on. The tension from the knob and the spring are actually what keep it from moving around. And then I can just lay the wires down in the back, bend it down a bit, and use some zip ties. Now most of these are going to have some sort of heat shrink or some sort of protection on the wires. I wouldn't put bare wires in here. If you don't have any of this protective cover, maybe put some heat shrink on it before you zip tie it down, just to further protect that wire. And there we go. That should hold it in place, keep it out of the way, make it fit in the enclosure. Again, I did use PETG for this part, just in case it got a little warm. Next, I wanted to take a look at the PSU and the best way to fit it underneath the table. And I decided that I wanted to rework the cover. I never really liked this acrylic cover anyway, and I'd like the wires to come out the back instead of out the bottom, so I want to make a printed one. And it'd be nice if it matched the rest of the enclosure. So that's what I did. And here's what I came up with. It's pretty much the same case. I did move the hole to the back side rather than the bottom, and I put a tab on it, just like a Prusa case would be, so that we could screw it to the underside of the enclosure. There will be a bracket underneath the PSU, but I just kept those two stock screw locations as well. I'm not going to go ahead and put the case on yet, because I want to run those LED wires down to these terminals, so that it'll be on every time the printer's on, 24 volt. But I will go ahead and install the receptacle. It should fit in exactly like stock. And back to the enclosure, I went ahead and created this tunnel so that we could run our wires through the bottom of the enclosure. I drilled a 7/8 inch hole that's around 18 millimeter, but this will protect the wires a bit, and this is big enough for that XT60 connector that comes on the Ender 3, and we should actually have enough wire with the stock wires. So we're just going to put this in here. Like so, and then we can run our LED wires through there as well. And then the printer sets it in there comfortably right about there, and the XT60 connector can go straight down. That hole is just right behind the main board enclosure here. Then down underneath, I'm just going to put some spade connectors on my wire for my lights. Right there, then we can just put that through the cover on our PSU. We'll just screw those down to a couple of the open terminals, and then we'll put our cover back on. And after the cover's on, remember we're using the stock screws that came with the printer. We can just put it up here, and we'll use these holes with two number 10 by 3/4 screws to lock it up here at the top. And then when we have that set, we'll use this bottom bracket to hold it in place. Screws go on the back of this, down in here into the leg. It's going to be hard for me to show you this with this camera, but I'll get you some shots from my cell phone. But the whole assembly is going to look like this. There you can see the bottom bracket, how it screws on. And then the top bracket, and you can just reconnect the wires up here. And before we move on, I want to talk about this hole right here. This is what you would use if you don't put your PSU underneath this enclosure. You can just run your power cord through here, and then you have this printed part that actually sandwiches around the wire, and then the whole thing slides in here. Now I'm just going to slide it in as is, so that it makes the hole smaller. But if you're not going to do this, you might even want to consider reworking this part, just so it doesn't have this hole. But it is nice to have it if you want to change it up later. So I'm just going to slide the blank in for now. And now we have everything plugged in, turned on, the light looks good, and I'm pretty happy with the enclosure overall. Now there's only one more thing we need to be concerned with to finish up our enclosure, and that's our spool holder. Now I'm going to use a 3D printed spool holder. This design came from Printed Solid. You can use it on their enclosures, but I sized it up a bit so I could use 5-pound spools, and I'm just going to screw this down to the top of the table. Now the filament will run to the side, because on a stock Ender 3, it takes filament in from the left. That's where the extruder is. And I'm just going to try to arc it down and put a hole in the middle of the acrylic with a 3D printed grommet and feed it in that way. Now it should work okay. There might be a better solution for this, especially as the printer goes up and down in Z, but I'm going to give it a try, and we might have to revisit it later. Let me show you what I'm going to do. So the spool holder is pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to use those number 10 by 3/4 screws, screw it down to the top of the Lack table. You can feed it straight down if you wanted to drill a hole, if you had a direct drive extruder or something like that. But it's going to set on the top of the enclosure like this, and then the filament is going to run out to the side. And I just created this 3D printed grommet. I'm going to drill a hole in the acrylic and glue this on there, just to give it a bit of a smoother path as it's running through that plastic. Now it probably makes more sense if you're going to do this to do it with the panel off. I can probably get it done with it in place, but I'm going to try to put a hole kind of in the middle of the Z path, line it up where I think the printer needs to go, I'm going about right here. Now that grommet that I have is a little less than 8mm on the inside, so I'm going to drill the hole at 8mm. And when dealing with acrylic, I usually like to use a step down bit to cut the holes. So there's the hole, and I'm just going to use a little super glue to put my 3D printed grommet in place. So we'll give that a try and see how it goes. And for the spool holder up top, I just pushed it towards the back so that it lines up with that hole that we drilled in the acrylic a little better. That's the correct path for it. And I used those 10 by 3/4 inch screws. And there we go. Our enclosure build is now complete, ready to use for your Ender 3. Now remember, we took the Prusa version 2 Lack table enclosure and converted it to fit this printer. I will leave all the parts that I created for this build in the description below. I should be able to build some sort of page with everything all in one location. Now, again, you might not need an enclosure, but it does kind of give your printer a more finished look. You can put some lights in there to help you see things a little bit better. And as you start upgrading your printer, maybe you go to an all-metal hot end, it will allow you to use higher temp plastics because you'll have a little bit of heat in there and the environment will be better controlled. You can probably still print things like ABS on the stock equipment, so give it a try. That's it for today. Hopefully you like this video, and I will see you on the next one.